Hello everyone, I'm the Enforcer, and welcome to the day 489 breaking news summary. Starting off in the nuclear power plant of Zaporizhia along the Novokakhovka Reservoir, we heard a statement from the United States today, represented by John Kirby, saying that they consider the situation at the nuclear power plant to not be serious. This comes after 3 days ago, Ukrainian intelligence officials claimed that the nuclear power plant was in the process of a meltdown due to a plan that had been reviewed and approved by the Russian central government. At this moment, nothing serious has happened at the nuclear power plant, and according to the United States, they do not consider the detonation of the power plant imminent. However, they do confirm that there have been explosives that were placed on the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant on 4 of the 6 reactors. Of course, making the situation incredibly serious, but luckily not as serious as it was supposed to be by Ukrainian intelligence circles around 72 hours ago. And so that situation is kind of in a state of limbo would be the best way to explain this at the moment. We know that the power plant is in a very precarious position due to there being nuclear weapons largely just sitting there ready to blow up. But at the same time, they have not blown up yet. And Ukrainian officials thought that that power plant would have blown up around 48 hours ago at least, and it's 2 days later, 48 hours later, and nothing as serious has happened at the nuclear power plant at this moment. And so luckily it appears that Ukrainian intelligence was not correct, and the nuclear power plant is in a state of limbo. Not in a great situation, it's not an amazing or optimal situation, but it is still not going to be blowing up anytime soon, at least according to what US officials have been saying. Moving on from that and on into the Wagner news, the Wagner is still causing a pretty good amount of wakes and tremors throughout the entirety of the Russian Federation and the Russian world for the most part, as we did hear today that Prighozin flew from Rostov to Minsk. This was actually spotted on a flight radar where we saw Prigozhin's private jet take off from the area of Rostov-on-Don and then flew over Volgograd, around Russia, and then on into the city of Minsk inside of Belarus. This is a fairly interesting development because for a while nobody knew where Prigozhin was. In fact, nobody knew where Prigozhin was for around 24 to 48 hours. It disappeared off the earth. An audio recording was finally made the other day. It was a statement from Prigozhin around 24 hours ago, which confirmed that he is not under Russian custody and he has not disappeared or has been assassinated, but he was alive and in fact somewhere in the area of Rostov-on-Don. We can now confirm that he was on a plane and on his way into Minsk in Belarus. Later on that day, Lukashenko did confirm that Prigozhin had arrived in Belarus, and we even got a little report of what hotel he was staying in, although we're not including that report in this video because that's largely superfluous information. But Lukashenko did confirm that Prigozhin had arrived to Belarus safely and was there at the moment. And so it does appear that at that point, Putin had held his part of the deal where Prigozhin would be able to leave Russia and be completely safe. And so he has ended up arriving in Belarus. And then once he arrived in Belarus, we start to hear a very interesting development from President Lukashenko, and that he said that the Wagner could possibly be given an abandoned Belarusian base. This abandoned base is actually not that far from the Ukrainian border and sits within the small town, and let me make sure to find it real quick. I believe it actually will sit around the town of Vasilevichy, which is right here. That's at least what we've been told. We're not really sure where it is. It may also be near Ozerchina, which is not that far from the Ukrainian border, and it's very close to Gomel. And it's supposed that this base, if refitted to full operational capacity, could actually house around 8,000 Wagner fighters. Once again, not incredibly large. That's about a brigade or two strength. But it is still concerning to hear that Lukashenko is possibly going to be allowing the Wagner group to exist within Belarus at this moment. And it's once again starting to reiterate and reaffirm claims from people who were spreading around rumors that this was an attempt to try and move the Wagner from Russia to Belarus. I don't think that was a direct part of the plan, but it does appear to be an indirect consequence of the plan, is that now Lukashenko is going to be trying to get parts of the Wagner and reform the Wagner inside of his own country in Belarus. Other than that, another interesting bit of news heard in Minsk was that Prigozhin said while he was there that he actually didn't plan on overthrowing the Russian government. According to Prigozhin's statement, he said, "We didn't march to overthrow Russia's leadership and turn around and turned around to avoid spilling the blood of Russian soldiers. We regret we had to hit Russian aviation. Our march aimed to prevent the destruction of Wagner. We wanted to hold accountable those who made mistakes during the special military operation. And so in this statement, he says that he wasn't wanting to overthrow the Russian government. However, we know that that's largely untrue, because once Putin came out in opposition to what the Wagner was doing, Prighozin made a statement saying that Russia was also going to be getting a new president. And so at that point, it became clear that they were planning on overthrowing the Russian government entirely, and there was no plan to just kill off a couple of generals and then return back to the front line. Moving on out of Belarus and some of the leading Wagner news since Prighozin has been in that area, moving on into Moscow, we've seen that the Russian government has been on damage control mode for the most part. Starting off with the first bit of news where we saw that Putin began to threaten the public inside of Russia. This is a part of that speech. And in this speech, Putin actually started to threaten the Russian public and said if anyone tried to do what Wagner did, he would put them down and it wouldn't even be funny. And that's largely just paraphrasing exactly what he said. He then said that he would be going into a meeting and he would continue this speech later. He then went into a meeting and he never finished this speech later. But it was a very weird speech. It was a very odd speech, and it appeared that his rage was starting to be taken out directly on the Russian public and threatened them themselves if they ever wanted to step up and speak out against the Russian government. Moving on from that little bit of news, we also heard that Putin also came out and made a statement saying that they had funded the Wagner from the May of 2022 to the present day with 86 billion rubles. That is exactly $1 billion nearly. And it's a fairly large amount. Putin also said that they were the only people funding the Wagner PMC, meaning that the Russians have the best track record of producing their own enemies. They sat there and funded a private military company that then tried to overthrow the Russian government. You can't really make that kind of stuff up. It's pretty crazy, and I don't think it makes the Russians look any better at this point. And it also doesn't make anything look better, considering that they are now going to be disbanding the Wagner PMC after putting $1 billion into it. $1 billion is 1/50th of the Russian military budget. And considering that that was a fairly significant investment for the Russians and it didn't pay off, it is pretty crazy to hear that they are now going to be giving up on Wagner completely. According to Anton Gerashenko on Twitter, his Twitter post says, I'm so sorry, everyone. It seems Putin has, in fact, announced the dissolution of Wagner PMC. He offered 3 options to Wagner mercenaries. 1 was to sign a contract with the Russian MOD or other power structures. 2 was to return home to their families. And the 3rd option was to leave and also join Prighozin in exile in Belarus. And so we can see here that the Russians are now dissolving their billion-dollar investment, and it also appears Lukashenko is trying to capitalize on the collapse of that billion-dollar investment by now taking on the Wagner PMC and possibly opening a new base for them inside of Belarus. Whether that'll be successful or not is really up to the ebbs and flows of time, and it really depends on how many Wagner soldiers end up choosing the option of leaving and going to Belarus and living there in exile. Because if a large amount of them choose to do that, we may actually see the Wagner PMC exists in some form or some scale inside of Belarus. We don't really know what's also going to be happening to the Wagner that's in Central Africa and the Middle East. There is a large Wagner presence in those areas, and we have no idea what would be happening to them down there. If they start to sign contracts with the Russian Ministry of Defense, that means that they're now official representatives of the Russian government, which adds a whole lot of complexity to what the Wagner does in Central Africa and the Middle East. Now they wouldn't just be some random third party mercenaries. Now they would represent the Russian government itself, which could lead to a lot of diplomatic issues. So if they go to Belarus, they could probably continue their operations inside of Central Africa and the Middle East, and Belarus could be the third, the middleman in between Russia and the Wagner group to make sure that there's no direct association with the Wagner and the Russian government, but the Wagner will be able to continue on its military operations. That may be a possible reason why we're starting to see all of these things develop in the background. And finally, one of our last bits of news about what's been going on in Russia is that we saw that a Ilyushin 96 took off today and is somewhere a few hours ago near Iceland, and it's flying over with a group of Russian diplomats to Washington, D.C. We don't know exactly what these diplomats are going to be arriving for and talking about, but it is still fairly interesting to know that after this coup, there is an entire Ilyushin 96 in flight on its way to the United States with a group of Russian diplomats. We'll be waiting to see what those diplomats say, if we even get to hear what they say, but a fairly interesting development nonetheless. That is largely all of the main topics and bits of news that we've heard surrounding the war in Ukraine today, from the end of Prigozhin's coup and him finally leaving Russia and arriving in Belarus, to the Russians now starting to go into damage control mode, and also the United States making a statement about the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant not being in that precarious a position. Today has been a fairly interesting day, as many of y'all have seen. If y'all have enjoyed this, please make sure to support us on Patreon. That helps us to keep these videos running. And also, if you would like, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, because that makes us really happy to know that folks enjoy our videos, and hit the like button and subscribe, and also comment as well, because it just really makes us happy, and it also keeps y'all apprised of when the news comes out. It allows y'all to get notifications, and these kinds of videos come out 7 days a week, and also we run live streams covering the news of the war in Ukraine in great detail 6 days a week, every single day except for Monday, and every single night that stream goes live at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. And so thank you all so much once again for watching, and I will see y'all in the next one.